field. It's just before sunset in Santa Cruz, Bolivia. Lamia Flight 2933 is about to take off. On board is Brazil's Cinderella football team Chapecoense. They're on their way to Colombia to complete a remarkable fairy tale season.
Colombia, here we come!
Based in the small city of Chapecó, southwest of Sao Paulo, the mid-level team has made an unlikely climb up the ranks of South American football. Now they're heading for their first ever final in the prestigious Copa Sudamericana.
For the Chapecoense fans and for the players, it was a big accomplishment.
Era uma grande façanha.
Bruno Rangel! Gol da Chapecoense!
Defender Alan Ruschel and backup goalkeeper Jackson Follman have grown close while playing together for Chapecoense.
A gente sempre foi uma equipe muito unida, né? Aquela equipe era uma equipe.
We were always a really united team, a team that wanted the best for everyone. We were a family, and that made us strong.
Isso fez com que a gente chegasse forte.
The team has hired a small Bolivian airline called Lamia to take it to Medellin.
V1, rotate.
The plane departs Santa Cruz, Bolivia at 6:18 p.m. It will be a near 4.5-hour, 1,600-mile trip to Rio Negro just outside Medellin, Colombia, the site of the championship game. Captain Miguel Quiroga and First Officer Fernando Goitia are veteran Bolivian pilots with more than 6,000 flight hours each.
Gear up. Gear up.
A young Bolivian pilot, Cici Arias, is observing from the jump seat. The crew is flying an Avro 146 regional jet.
The 146 has always been a very, very sound airframe and a very good design. It's a little more expensive to operate because you've got 4 engines, but that's a lot of reliability.
In the cabin, the team settles in for the night flight.
Tava todo mundo muito feliz e muito ansioso para que chegasse logo.
Everyone was very excited and anxious to get to Colombia, to start focusing on that first grand final the next day.
E no dia seguinte fazer aquela primeira grande final.
Partway through the flight, Jackson Follman turns to his friend Alan Ruschel.
Giovanni, come sit with me. No, I want to sleep.
Eu e o Alan, a gente tem uma amizade há mais de 10 anos.
Alan and I had been friends and played together for over 10 years. I asked Alan to sit with me so we could listen to music as we practically lived together.
Far below, their destination, Jose Maria Cordova Airport in the city of Rio Negro, is very busy getting planes to and from its single runway.
Rio Negro 2933, good evening.
First Officer Goitia checks in with air traffic controller Yaneth Molina.
Lamia 2933 control, good evening. Radar contact, maintain and descend to flight level 230. Join the Rio Negro VOR.
Molina immediately instructs the crew to hold for their final approach because other planes are lined up to land.
Holding at Gemli.
Lamia 2933 goes into a holding pattern at a navigation point called Gemli. A few minutes later, a request from the Lamia cockpit takes Molina by surprise.
Lamia 2933, request priority for approach.
We have a fuel problem.
Please understand you are requesting priority for landing also with a fuel problem, correct?
Affirmative.
You ask for priority, you're basically making a request that if they can fit it in, get you in a little bit faster.
Maintain present heading and stand by to continue your descent.
We'll maintain present heading and standing by for descent.
To make space for Lamia, Molina starts redirecting the other planes.
Avianca 9771, I need you to start your approach.
Prepare cabin for landing.
The plane has now been holding for about 7 minutes.
What's going on? We're about to land. Lamia 2933, request inbound vectors.
Stand by, I have an aircraft below you on approach. Additionally, they are doing a runway inspection.
But the situation in the cockpit has suddenly become more urgent.
We have a fuel emergency.
That's why I'm asking you at once for final approach, requesting immediate descent.
It's very unusual to declare priority and then 30 seconds later say they're out of fuel.
Lamia 2933, make a right turn now. To begin your descent, you have traffic 1 mile below.
When you declare an emergency, the Red Sea parts. Now everybody is concentrating on doing exactly what you need, especially to get to the airfield as soon as possible.
Yeah, I thought we were almost there.
Ninguém comentou nada.
Nobody said anything to us. We didn't know anything.
Molina needs to move the Lamia flight away from other planes in its path.
Lamia, turn right to begin your descent.
But instead, the pilots turn left, straight towards them.
Negative. We're already starting to descend.
I'm heading for the runway.
Avianca 9771, turn left immediately, heading 270.
They didn't follow instructions and started descending very rapidly. They almost hit one of the Avianca planes.
When you start descending without a clearance through other people's possible assigned airspace, you're gambling that you're not going to hit somebody and they're not going to hit you.
In the cabin, the lights go off. The engines fall silent. The passengers feel the plane sinking.
I don't remember anything as we were falling. I don't remember anything. All we could do is pray and ask God to save us. I remember asking God to make the lights and motors turn back on.
2933, total electrical failure, without fuel.
Runway's cleared. Firefighters alerted.
Tell her we need vectors. Vectors.
Vectors to the runway.
The crew needs the controller to give them directions to the runway, but the plane has disappeared from her radar.
I tried to keep in touch with them. I kept telling them the runway was free, the firefighters were ready.
Lost your radar signal. I don't have you. Report heading now.
Heading 360. 360.
9,000 feet. Vectors. Vectors.
When they told me their altitude was 9,000 feet, I thought the worst.
My God, please help us, oh God. God, please help us.
Você não tem pra onde correr.
You have nowhere to run. You feel desperate. I was terrified. I didn't want to die. I didn't want any of us to die.
Enfim, então.
I was thinking about my son, who is a pilot. I wanted to be God, to be able to save the plane. It was extremely hard, and I couldn't believe what was happening.
Two 2933, come in. 2933, come in.
An aircraft has vanished, fallen off the radar, radio communications lost. Molina is overwhelmed by what has just happened on her watch. Chapecoense goalkeeper Jackson Folman has survived the crash of Lamia Flight 2933.
Eu acabo acordando no meio da mata e
I woke up in the middle of the forest. I don't know how long I'd been asleep for.
fico desacordado.
Help! Help, please! I'm over here!
Eu também não via nada, estava muito escuro.
I couldn't see anything because it was too dark. I remember someone approaching and touching my hand. They asked for my name and age and told me to calm down because they were going to help me.
E falou para mim ter calma, que ela ia me tirar dali, daquele lugar.
Emergency crews rush to the crash site. Mostly they find dead bodies. But against the odds, 7 passengers are still alive. Besides Jackson Folman, 3 other Chapecoense players have survived: Ruschel, Elio Neto, and Danilo Padilla. 70 people are dead, making this one of the worst tragedies in the history of sport.
Desastre de avião é uma notícia que se espalha.
News about the plane crash spreads really quickly. If you turn on the TV, CNN, Fox News, they are already talking about the accident. Whatever the accident.
Tá lá falando do acidente, qualquer que seja o acidente.
The morning light reveals the full extent of the crash. The Lamia plane hit the crest of an 8,700-foot mountain called Cerro Gordo. The Colombian Aircraft Accident Investigation Group wastes no time starting their work. A team is on site at daybreak, with Julian Echeverri in charge.
It looks like the fuselage spun around 180 degrees.
Esta dinámica del impacto como tal nos muestra pues la posición.
The wreckage showed the plane's position in relation to the runway and the crew's intentions of heading there.
Probablemente la tripulación de dirigirse hacia allá.
Echeverri and his team work around the clock, collecting evidence on the mountain.
Landing gear was down. Look, the flaps are extended.
The plane was configured for landing. It's clear that the crew was descending towards the airport. But it crashed 10 miles short of the runway.
To end up with this aircraft in the mountains 10 miles away, only 10 miles away from the runway, it's just insult to injury on a very high scale.
I could see the airport from here. The runway lights were on. Why didn't they make it?
Investigators have a tough job ahead. Aircraft debris has tumbled down both sides of the mountain. But their biggest clue is what they don't find.
No scorch marks. No fuel smell either.
Y se percibía un ligero.
There was a very light smell of fuel at the accident site. Normally, when planes crash with fuel on board, the smell is much stronger.
Y tienen combustible a bordo, el olor se hace más penetrante.
The fuel level indicators are at 0.
The plane was out of fuel.
Absolutely, we were shocked. It's unusual for a passenger aircraft of this size to run out of fuel. It was a very unique situation.
Tenga un agotamiento de combustible. Fue una situación particular.
Investigators are mystified. Why would the plane have run out of fuel? Was it a fuel leak?
Engines 1 and 4 are up there. 2 and 3 are here by the main wreckage.
All 4 engines are located and examined. There is no sign of fire or failure. They conclude the engines worked until the fuel ran out. The question is, how did the fuel get so low in the first place? Was it a mechanical failure or human error?
El desafío como tal en la investigación estuvo
The challenge was to investigate every aspect of why that happened.
relacionados con el mismo.
The entire football world is grieving. In the team's hometown, fans take to the stadium to pay their respects. One of the surviving players, Danilo Padilla, has succumbed to his injuries. The three remaining players are all in intensive care. Elio Neto has just woken from a coma. Alan Ruschel requires spinal surgery. Jackson Follman needs to have his right leg amputated.
The first thing I said was, I choose my life over my leg. I always thank God for the miracle of life. I wish that miracle could have happened to all of us.
With all eyes on this case, the stakes are high for investigators.
When we have an accident of this magnitude and everything that surrounded it, certainly there was a lot of pressure on the investigators.
Under mounting pressure, investigators dig into their work.
I got the other one.
They hope the flight recorders will help them understand why Lamia 2933 couldn't make it to the airport.
Take these black boxes to the lab.
Both the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder appear to be in good shape, but they'll have to be sent to a lab to be processed before investigators can analyze them. While the flight recorders are being analyzed, investigators focus their attention on the last person to speak with the crew of Lamia 2933, air traffic controller.
Thank you for meeting with me.
Yanez Molina.
Maintain present heading and stand by to continue your descent.
Within days, recordings of her communications with the pilots circulate in the news and on social media. Many blame her for what happened.
Empiezan a divulgar en las noticias.
The news started publishing that I was responsible for the accident. It was all over social media. I started getting threats. I had people calling my cell phone.
También hubo gente que me empezó a llamar a mi celular.
Investigators need to get to the bottom of what she did.
It's been a very difficult time.
Tell me what happened before they declared the emergency. Were there other planes on hold?
Yes, 3. See, they were in a holding pattern right when Lamia radioed.
La tripulación de
When the Lamia crew got to that airspace, it was already busy with other aircraft. This situation hindered, even directly delayed their approach to the runway.
Por otras aeronaves. Y esa condición evidentemente afectó o directamente demoró la aproximación.
What did you do when they told you they had a fuel emergency?
But that's the crazy thing. They only told me that they had a fuel emergency right before they crashed, with no warning.
The delay to inform her put Molina in a tough situation. Investigators need to know how she handled it. To find out, they turn to the air traffic control tapes, which recorded the final 18 minutes of communication between Molina and the crew.
Okay, let's start.
Rio Negro 2933, good evening.
Lamia 2933 control, good evening. Radar contact, maintain and descend to flight level 230. Join the Rio Negro VOR.
Holding at Gimli.
Y la tripulación no manifiesta.
The crew didn't report anything. They only confirmed they were holding for the approach.
Que va a mantener.
Lamia 2933, request priority for approach. We have a fuel problem.
Even after reporting a fuel problem, the crew doesn't give Molina any cause for concern.
Understand you are requesting priority for landing also with the fuel problem, correct?
Affirmative.
La voz del...
The first officer's voice was always calm and never seemed disturbed or anything. Totally
En
relaxed.
ningún momento se notó alterado. Nada, totalmente tranquilo.
Okay, stand by. I will give you vectors for the approach. Estimate 7 minutes to commence approach.
We'll stand by for vectors.
Cuando en uno de esos sostenimientos, la tripulación...
When the crew was instructed to keep holding for 7 more minutes, again they did not report that their aircraft was in critical condition.
Y tampoco se tiene un aviso de la tripulación al tránsito aéreo diciendo que está en condición crítica.
How long until you need to start your approach, 2933?
Only when Molina checks in with them does the crew finally speak up.
We have a fuel emergency. That's why I'm asking you at once for final approach, requesting immediate descent.
Pause. They declare a fuel emergency 7 minutes after entering the holding pattern. Why wait so long?
Cuando la aeronave
When an aircraft runs out of fuel and the indicator light in the cockpit goes on, a mayday mayday or fuel emergency must be declared. This crew did not follow these procedures.
La tripulación como mayday, mayday.
Then they turn left here, towards the runway.
Turning left puts Flight 2933 in the direct path of other planes in the holding pattern.
Keep going.
Lamia 2933, make a right turn now to begin your descent.
Negative. We're already starting to descend. I'm heading for the runway.
Moments later, the crew reports the plane has lost power.
2933, total electrical failure, without fuel.
Stop. They didn't explain the situation until it was too late.
There's nothing she could have done.
Investigators conclude Molina did what she could to help Lamia 2933 in those stressful moments before the crash. But the recordings raise another question.
Here's what I don't get. The fuel warning should have gone off long before the start of the approach. But they don't declare an emergency until here.
Echeverri and his team need to know why the pilots took so long to declare an emergency. Did the plane's fuel warning system malfunction? They hope the flight data recorder holds the answers. Investigators are ready to analyze the information from Lamia 2933's flight data recorder.
Let's isolate the fuel flow rate. If there was a leak or some other problem, it should show up here. Okay, let's go.
They consider whether a leak in the fuel system caused the fuel to flow too fast, leading to an unexpected engine shutdown. The plane has 3 main fuel tanks. The center tank constantly feeds fuel to the left and right tanks. From there, it's pumped to the engines.
They're consuming just over 1,000 pounds of fuel an hour throughout their cruise. Very steady.
El consumo de combustible, de acuerdo a los...
The fuel consumption, according to the data recorder, was normal for the duration of the flight.
El desarrollo del vuelo.
Fuel system checks out. Let's look at the warning system.
The FDR also records when low fuel warnings are triggered. If the warning system malfunctioned, it might not have alerted the pilots until it was too late.
The warning goes on here at 9:15.
Well, that can't be right. They don't declare a fuel emergency until 9:52.
They knew they were low on fuel for nearly 40 minutes without declaring a fuel emergency.
Investigators can't believe what they're seeing.
At 9:15, a low fuel warning light turns on.
That's got to be about 180 miles to Medellin. They should have found somewhere closer to land.
They're here. Bogota Airport is here.
77 miles away.
Why didn't they land at Bogota?
Normalmente cuando se...
According to the manufacturer, when the low fuel warning comes on in this aircraft, you are only guaranteed 23 more minutes of flight.
Las aeronaves tienen un remanente por fabricante.
Right then and there, you ought to be looking at where do we get this airplane on the ground?
The warning comes on here. Instead of landing in Bogota, they travel another 29 minutes to the holding area. Then they agree to hold for another 7 minutes.
And they don't say a word to their controller about their low fuel warning.
It's a clear deviation from how pilots are taught to react.
How, after all this time, and all this effort, and all this training, and all this knowledge, can we end up with people deviating so far that they put themselves in almost a certain disaster?
Why didn't they declare a fuel emergency sooner?
And there's something else that doesn't add up.
40 minutes after the warning came on, the engines stopped. The plane was 15 miles from the airport and at nearly 16,000 feet, high enough to glide to the runway.
The mountain is 8,700 feet. They should have been able to clear it.
Investigators make another startling discovery. The crew dropped the landing gear at nearly 18,000 feet. A minute later, the pilots extend the flaps to 33 degrees, the correct position for landing.
Landing gear down here, and then they extend their flaps here.
But there's one big problem: timing.
Extender los trenes de aterrizaje y los flaps como tal a esa altura.
At this altitude, extending the landing gear and the flaps exerted big aerodynamic resistance, which was evidenced by the loss of altitude in the last moments of flight.
Pérdida de altitud en los últimos instantes del accidente.
They configure for a landing and then they start dropping like a rock.
Si se hubieran apagado todos los motores, la tripulación.
The crew would not have been able to extend the landing gear or the flaps when all the engines had shut down.
Tren de aterrizaje y extender los flaps.
So they do it early, before the engines flame out.
So you look at this and you say, oh my God, you violated the basic procedures. We know how to stay safe. We know how not to run out of gas in the air. And you guys didn't do a single thing in accordance with the rules.
Why would commercial pilots act so recklessly? Investigators now turn to the CVR, the cockpit voice recorder.
Looks like we have a problem.
Tell me.
It's the CVR. It stopped recording mid-flight, long before the crash.
How could that happen?
1 hour and 40 minutes before the end of the flight, the recorder cuts out. The investigators have no way of knowing what the crew said to each other in the moments before the crash. It's a huge setback.
Unfortunately, we lost a good portion of the cockpit voice recorder transcripts. It would have been very good for us, very beneficial to have those recordings.
To understand why the pilots acted so recklessly, investigators search for clues in their training records. Both pilots recently completed proficiency checks for the Avro 146.
Chequeo que se realizó en Zurich.
There was a checkup done in Zurich a few months prior. The captain and the first officer both passed their checkups, yet there were some improvements suggested to the pilots.
Se realizaron unas observaciones, unas acciones de mejora a estos pilotos.
The captain has more than 3,400 hours on the aircraft, but an examiner's comment outlining one of the pilot's weaknesses grabs the investigator's attention.
Take the necessary time to prepare the plane in an emergency.
The first officer was trained in the Bolivian Air Force and had been flying for 20 years, but he also has an examiner's comment that raises concern.
Y por parte del copiloto,
regarding the first officer, there was an observation made that in emergency situations, he needed to report Mayday, Mayday, or Pan, Pan, as per the regulations.
Pan, Pan, según la normatividad.
Communication with ATC in emergencies should be punctual. Declare Pan Pan or Mayday.
So both pilots had trouble with emergency procedures.
Eso es el hallazgo que.
So, this was the finding that best explained the chain of events which led the crew not to report the emergency as they should have.
Como debió ser.
The red flags may explain the pilot's failure to follow emergency procedures in the crisis. But a bigger question still remains. Why would the crew push the airplane to its limits?
They didn't just press the limits. They did something really criminal because they put the airplane right at the edge of its capability to burn fuel and get them back on the ground safely.
Training records reveal that Lamia 2933's crew was prone to errors in emergency situations. But investigator Echeverry's team needs to know why the fuel emergency happened in the first place. Could a flight planning error be the cause?
You asked me to look into the flight plan? Well, it's complicated.
Lamia was initially hired to fly the team from Sao Paulo, Brazil, to Medellin, Colombia. But there was a hitch in that plan.
Why are there so many flight plans?
Because they kept getting rejected.
Because Lamia is a Bolivian charter company, Brazilian regulations did not allow it to conduct a flight from Brazil to Colombia. Only operators from either of those two countries are permitted to do that. So the team was forced to take a regular commercial flight to Bolivia, from where they could take Lamia to Medellin.
Lamia must have known that it was not possible for a Bolivian plane to depart from Brazil. This indicates a lack of organization from the company.
Here's the final flight plan. From Santa Cruz to Medellin.
Santa Cruz to Medellin, 1,600 miles. Did they have enough fuel?
I'll check.
Las compañías aéreas, cuando hacen sus operaciones,
Airlines need to account for fuel consumption. It is one of the fundamental pillars of airline operations. This case is no exception. Aviation maintains really specific regimes in terms of fuel, and this is essential in the operation of a plane.
la parte del combustible, que es esencial en la operación de las aeronaves.
Investigators traveled to Bolivia's Santa Cruz airport, where Lamia 2933 fueled up. They want to know exactly how much was in the tanks before it took off.
So you have a record on how much fuel you put in flight 2933? It says you put in 3,606 pounds.
Fuel quantities have to be calculated based on expected fuel burn, which has to do with the weight, it has to do with the altitude.
The plane arrived at Santa Cruz Airport with 16,396 pounds of fuel. The fueler topped it up to just over 20,000 pounds, almost full.
So they take off with about 20,000 pounds of fuel. Should that do it?
Taxi before takeoff, 441 pounds.
Julian Echeverri and his team calculate how much fuel the plane legally needed to make a direct flight to Medellin.
You have to have enough fuel to take off, fly to your destination, and land. You have to have enough fuel to go down and make an approach and come back up. And then you have to have enough fuel to fly to an alternate destination and to hold for 30 minutes, and if it's a remote island, for longer than that, and then to descend and land.
Total, 26,570 pounds. So they were short by about 6,570 pounds.
They left with enough to get to Medellin, but barely a drop more.
The plane could only fly 50 miles further than the planned flight to Rio Negro. The plane had nowhere near enough fuel to meet legal requirements.
E resolveu ir fazer aquele voo com a
He flew with an almost zero margin, obviously with the expectation it would work, but he took the risk.
Mas correu risco.
Why would pilots intentionally make this flight without enough fuel? As investigators dig deeper into the aircraft's flight records, they discover a troubling pattern.
He flew the route from Medellin to Santa Cruz 3 times this year.
And did it every time without refueling.
The crew had made the same flight, but in the opposite direction,
100,
without any reserve fuel.
50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
Each time, they made it. That led them to make a fatal miscalculation about the amount of fuel needed to get to Rio Negro.
El consumo de combustible es un poco menor porque
Less fuel is used because Rio Negro is higher in altitude. You ascend a shorter distance, therefore saving more fuel. No doubt that contributed to the flight arriving safely at Santa Cruz.
Investigators now need to figure out exactly when the pilots knew they were going to have a problem with fuel.
Okay, let's see what they have to say.
They decide to check the cockpit communications that were captured on the CVR before it cut out.
This thing is screwed. We have 3,200 pounds. That is not enough.
Fuel warning hasn't gone off yet, but they're already talking about a fuel problem.
Yeah.
The crew realized they were consuming more fuel than they had expected.
Cuando escuchamos los registradores, evidentemente.
When we listened to the recordings, they were most definitely seeing that the fuel was not going to be enough to reach their destination.
El consumo de combustible no iba a ser el adecuado para llegar al destino.
What city is right before Bogotá?
Leticia. Do you think it's operated? There's more services available in Bogotá.
We go straight to Bogotá.
Y se escucha inclusive varias declaraciones entre los dos donde dicen que consideran.
You can even hear various conversations between the two of them, considering Leticia, Bogotá, and Cali as possible alternatives to refuel.
Para poder reabastecer el combustible.
Then investigators hear why they changed the plan.
Lamia 2933, you're on radar contact. I confirm your route is cleared. Proceed to Rio Negro via Nerso.
ATC changed the route.
Yeah.
They're getting us direct, bro.
The controller offers the crew a more direct route to Rio Negro than they planned, reducing their flight time and fuel consumption.
Era una ruta corta.
It was a shorter route, and this made them change their minds, and they decided to continue their flight to Rio Negro.
Hacia Rio Negro.
We have enough to get us there? Right now we have 3,200. Should we keep going? Keep going.
They're going for it.
Aren't you going down to Bogotá?
No. We already analyzed it. We already thought about it.
We're not going to Bogotá.
Think they can make it to Medellín.
Ellos se olvidan de Bogotá, que lo tenían muy cerca.
They bypass Bogotá nearby and continue with their main idea to land in Medellín. It's difficult for us as investigators to understand that decision.
Nosotros como investigadores entender esa decisión.
The crash would never have happened if they had refueled in Bogotá. But the crew would have had to explain to authorities why they left Santa Cruz without enough fuel. And the team would have been upset with yet more delays. Investigators will never know what else the pilots talked about, because the cockpit voice recorder then cuts out.
Se tuvo en cuenta dentro de las.
We considered why it stopped working. Possible reasons include an electrical problem, or perhaps that it had been stopped in the cockpit.
Desde la cabina de este grabador.
The most probable explanation is not a simultaneous failure of the box itself. It's that some human being who didn't want to be recorded as to what they were doing pulled the circuit breaker. That would be my vote.
One key question remains for investigators. Why would the pilots need to cover their tracks? Less than 2 months after the crash, Chapecoense plays a match using players loaned from other teams. They take to their home pitch in front of 20,000 jubilant fans. The 3 surviving teammates are honored in a ceremony in which they are awarded the Copa Sudamericana title. Jackson Follman proudly carries the trophy, surrounded by his closest friends.
Poder entrar dentro da arena e a torcida toda gritando meu nome, gritando o nome dos meninos também. Então isso foi uma emoção muito grande.
To be in the arena and have everyone scream my name and the names of the others as well, that was an incredible feeling. Obviously, we wanted everyone to be there. It's a moment that will forever be in my heart and memory.
Minha memória no meu coração.
The survivors are still healing, still living with pain. But they're going through the trauma together.
Today is a day that we need to celebrate life, celebrate football, and I would humbly ask you to all applaud for those brothers that are gone.
Neto e Alan são meus compadres, meus padrinhos de casamento, então.
Neto and Alan are my best friends and groomsmen. We know what we mean to each other and the importance of being there for each other. We're together every day. We need each other.
todos os dias eu tô com os dois, porque a gente sabe que a gente precisa um do outro.
Meanwhile, in Bolivia, prosecutors charge company co-owner Vargas Gamboa with manslaughter. And aviation authorities have suspended Lamia's operating license. One of the other owners turns out to be Captain Miguel Quiroga. He wasn't just a pilot, he had a financial stake in the company. Did he gamble dozens of lives just to save money on fuel?
When you've got somebody who is flying the airplane and responsible for the airplane, who also is a part owner and knows the finances, you've got a conflict of interest.
Several months later, Echeverry's team gets its hands on Lamia's company files. It's a treasure trove of information.
Looks like they owed everybody. Even the employees weren't getting paid.
The company was in big financial trouble, behind on its maintenance bills and staff salaries. 2 of its planes were grounded. The accident plane was the only one flying.
When you've got a smaller carrier and you audit it, or somebody audits it, and they find all these unpaid bills and all these financial difficulties, really what you should be able to do is just put them on the ground, because there's almost no way they're going to continue to operate with the level of safety that the public expects, and the reason why is they can't pay for it.
So why was Lamia allowed to fly?
Existieron deficiencias en la organización.
There were deficiencies in the Bolivian Civil Aviation Authority, inadequate supervision of the operation of this company.
De todo lo que tiene que ver con la operación de esta compañía.
The final report attributes the accident to inappropriate planning and execution of the flight and failure to follow proper fueling requirements.
Yo creo que todo el tiempo la tripulación.
I think the crew knew they were doing something illegal. The crew knew they were below the appropriate fuel levels from the beginning of the flight. This is a sad and unfortunate part of the accident.
Entre otras cosas de este accidente.
The final report also tells the world that Yaneth Molina was not responsible for the crash. Her reputation is restored.
Después del informe final, pues mucho más.
After the final report came out, I felt more relaxed, more comfortable. I could breathe easier. I consider that my name is respected now.
Considero que sí, que mi nombre ya es respetado.
Alan Ruschel returned to play with his new Chapecoense teammates in August 2017. Elio Neto recovered from his injuries and is now back in training. And Jackson Folman is walking again with a prosthetic leg. But the pain and memories of that night endure.
Eu quero que as pessoas olhem pra gente
I want people to pray for us and remember all of those. I'd like to see everyone honor the people who unfortunately left us that night.
Da maneira possível aqueles que infelizmente partiram naquela noite.